Hello, and welcome back to the Writers Craft Summit. In this session, I'm speaking with Lori Puma. Lori, welcome to the summit.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm really excited to be here.
So we are going to be digging into, in this session, how to write scenes that keep readers reading. Really important stuff. We don't want to lose our readers.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we dive into the things that keep them reading, let's focus on the one other word, which is a scene. So like, what is a scene? So just so that we're all on the same page. So a scene is a small part of your novel, and its purpose is to move the story along while it also holds the reader's attention and makes them want to keep going. So that's kind of like the overview of it. And then just to give you some idea of like what's typical. So scenes are generally between 1,000 to 2,000 words long in modern contemporary fiction. They could be longer for historical or fantasy or other stories with a lot of world building. And they're also something that happens in the present moment at a specific time, a specific location, and from a particular point of view. And then the one other piece is that there's something that at least one of the characters experiences a change in the scene. And that change helps them take one small step towards the overall goal of the novel.
Yeah, so I mean, that's how, when I'm working with my clients, I always kind of try to contextualize it as temporal. If we move forward or backwards in time, we're changing scenes. Geographic, if we're moving to a new location, it's probably a change of scene. Or POV, as you said, if we're moving from one person's head to another, we're probably into a new scene.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, Kevin and I are like, this is not an accident that we have the same definition, but I just wanted to make sure that for everybody in the summit that we have that groundwork before we talk about the like, okay, how do we keep the reader's attention now? Because that's the really fun and exciting part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess, in addition to those three things that I mentioned, something key that you hit on there is this idea of change. And we do have another presentation. Chris Kennedy at the summit is going to dig into this idea of turning points and this idea of polarity shifts throughout the novel. But what's great about today's presentation is we're going to dig into scene specific change and turning points, which is great.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So let's now talk about how do we keep a reader's attention and make them want to keep reading? And I think about it in three different layers. And those layers both correspond to stages that you might plan in a novel. And they also are like, if you're a beginner, and you've never written anything before, you want to make sure you do layer 1 first. And then if you're, as you grow as a writer, then you pay more attention to layers 2 and 3. So what are those 3 layers? So the first one is make your scenes easy to believe and imagine. And then the second one is to strengthen the emotional bond between your characters and your reader. And then the third is to keep your reader hooked with the right balance between pleasing and teasing.
And so you were saying those are kind of built on top of one another. So like it's the fundamental core is make sure the scene's easy to believe and imagine. And then once we've established that, we can kind of build those other ones on top. The yes. Emotional bond and the teasing and pleasing.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So and I should say, so I'm going to talk about each of those 3 layers. And then I also brought an example from Game of Thrones that we can walk through. That is a sequence, which is a set of like 2 or more scenes that lead up to a slightly larger or a goal that's bigger than a scene, but smaller than your novel's overall goal.
Perfect. And we'll put a download button below the video where people can download the example and take a look at it. You put together a nice PDF for them.
I did, yes. Yeah, so let's talk about layer 1, which is make it easy to believe and imagine your story. So what do we mean by that? So the first part is that we want to make the timing of the events in our story very clear and realistic. and then well, so there's the timing piece and then the geographic piece. So we want to make the timing clear enough that readers can put everything in our story on a timeline. And then we want to make the places in our story easy for them to picture in their mind. And this is really important because if a reader is spending a lot of energy trying to figure out, like, does this come before the last scene or after it? And like, I think this guy was in the hallway, but now he seems to be like outside. That's energy that they do not have available to bond with your character or to like care about what happens next. So if we're really clear, this just makes adding in the layers too like so much easier, and it also just makes it a lot more fun to read.
As someone who writes a lot of YA, I can tell you something that comes into play a lot here is the idea that kids don't go to school on the weekend. And so this idea of being really clear on your timeline is really important when you're writing about teenagers, because if you have them going to school 6 days in a row in your novel, something wrong is going on there.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about time. So we don't necessarily need to know the exact date and the exact time in every single novel. Some novels we do, like for example, The Martian by Andy Weir. We've got a dude stuck on Mars and people need to come back and pick him up, and like they need to be perfectly matched or Matt Damon's gonna die. Right? So in that story, we want to be very precise about our time, but in a lot of stories, we do not need to be that precise, and we can sort of think of time as something like seasons or like days since a woman went missing, like in Gone Girl, or it could be measured in something like the number of battles since the zombie apocalypse. It's really just important that readers can be like, okay, this happened before this, we're in a flashback now, we're in the present moment, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think another example of that is I'm working on a book with a client right now, and it's kind of Harry Potter-esque in that a big chunk of Act 2 is a series of training sequences where the character is learning new skills. And we were working on it week to week, going scene to scene to scene. And then at some point after like 2 months of this, my client was like, I think this day is getting kind of long. And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, this is all day one. And I was like, what? I thought we were like 3 months into the school year here. But in her mind, this was all taking place in the same day. And again, it's just that idea of believability. It's just only so much could happen in a day. They can only have so many lessons, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that idea that you just mentioned of like just cramming a lot of stuff into a single day, that also happens with place. Like both like there's really an art to putting the right amount of action in a place and time, and then moving on to the next scene at a different place and time. So, and a lot of times problems with time are mixed up with place, which is why I put these two things together. So let me just give you like a couple thoughts about that. So when we're talking about place, the key is that we are building an image in someone else's mind based on our words. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to give them the exact coordinates on like a globe or a map or however, you represent your star system. We just need to give the readers enough to create that picture in their mind. So we can say things like, this is the parking lot of a restaurant, and maybe we've indicated somewhere that like it's in small town Alabama, or it can be something like it's inside a carriage in a back alley in Paris, or we're in one room in a spaceship, or the grounds of a haunted house, or we just need to give those things that really call up images, and then anytime our character moves from like one room to another room, from the inside to the outside, if they're traveling and then they stop, or they're, you know, stationary and then they start moving, we want to give the reader information so that they can update that image, so that we don't have that disconnect that Kevin just described about the like, well, this is a really long day and I thought that we were 3 months in. The same thing can happen with place.
Yeah, I mean, what I always say here is you just need to avoid this kind of people floating in darkness syndrome, where every once in a while I'll read oh, Lori almost did a spit take on that one. Right? I'll read a scene and it's like these people are just floating in darkness, and we have no real sense of the materiality of the world around them.
Yes. Yeah. So exactly. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about was sort of like the more emotional, like the disconnect between like how people, you know, how we process events. So, you know, Kevin, you were talking about like, you know, we had a lot of action of like training and things like that. And then the other side is with like arguments. I think that's that tends to go in the opposite direction of time. Like we have people make these enormous changes that usually take them, you know, like months or years, and they're like, oh, you know, long lost lover, sure, I'll accept you back and let's have a passionate kiss like within 12 minutes of greeting each other. And like that's just not how we live.
It reminds me of in Revenge of the Sith, I think it is, the third Star Wars prequel, where Anakin Skywalker, who's been like our protagonist for 3 films, suddenly he's just kind of like, he's like, okay, I'll go bad. And then he's just like, he's like, and then Palpatine is like, rise, Lord Vader. And just all of a sudden, Anakin's now a bad guy. It was just like, he flips the switch in his head. He's like, oh, I'm a bad guy now, right? That's not really,
yeah. Like that's that why the prequels are kind of not universally loved.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we've really covered all that I wanted to cover here. Well, actually, no, there was one other piece. So I just what I want you to take away from this is that like whenever you're changing a place, whenever there is a break or a jump in time, that is an indication that one scene is stopping and another scene is starting. And that's really, really important because it really helps you know how frequently you need to add in layer 2, which is building the emotional bond.
Okay. All right. Well, that's perfect. Let's dig into level 2 then. Take it up a level.
Okay. So layer 2. So how do you build an emotional bond between your characters and your reader? And first, let's just say, so what do we mean? What is an emotional bond? An emotional bond forms between the reader and the characters when a scene triggers empathy for those characters in the reader. And you might be like, what are you talking about? What is this empathy? So readers don't actually like read books to see how somebody else would win a war or fall in love or like outwit a master criminal. They read to have the experience of doing those things themselves. Like, I want to feel like I'm in love and that I'm the smartest investigator ever and that I am like the ultimate hero. Like, we want that excitement and that passion and that satisfaction without the actual danger and risk of doing these things in real life.
Absolutely. And something I found really interesting, an experience I went through with my novel M School, was it taught me just how much people want to empathize with the protagonist. You know, I think as authors, we're often thinking about like, oh, what can I do to make my character likable? What can I do to make them fall in love with my character? But the reader's really on your side, because my book, M School, I wrote this book about this horrible person. And my beta readers kept saying to me, like, why does she keep doing these bad things? And I was like, she's a bad person. That's why. But they didn't want to believe that. They so badly wanted to like her and identify with her and empathize with her. And so it was a great lesson, really, like for me, understanding this relationship of my readers and the characters that I'm writing about, and how badly they want to connect with them emotionally.
Yeah, and I think that just really illustrates the point of like, we assume that as readers that the characters have really good reasons for doing the bad things that they're doing, for doing anything that they're doing in the story. And the way that that you can communicate like what those reasons are is through change, right?
Hugely important.
So, and I think we said this at the top, but at least one character in every single scene should have a meaningful change from the beginning to the end of the scene. And I think about these changes as in 3 different categories. You'll see when we get to the example that like when we're writing fiction or reading fiction, these categories are just to help you, brainstorm as a writer. They're not like hard and fast rules.
Mm-hmm.
So the first category of change is basic human survival. So things like somebody's thirsty or dehydrated, and then they find water by the end of the scene, or they're exhausted and they finally get to sleep, or they're they had a great meal at the beginning of the scene and then by the end they're hungry. It's safe to danger, free to captured, unhurt to injured, housed to homeless, and these can go in either direction. And these are things that we can all relate to. We've either got experience with them directly, like, I mean, I've been hungry before, right? Or tired or thirsty, or there are things that we're totally terrified that we're going to have experiences for. And like our brains are just hardwired to, constantly be looking for food and making sure we have shelter and, making sure that we're safe. So these are, you don't have to have a person that's great as long as you show that like, oh, they're doing really bad things because they're hungry. Like totally makes sense.
Absolutely.
So that's like the first category, the basic human survival. The second category of change is relationship status. So these are things like being part of a couple, broken up, belonging to a group, to being an outcast, being alone to befriended. These are like, we're also hardwired as humans to care about relationships, and like this just taps into the feelings that we already have as humans about, like relationships, how we'd like our relationships to be, and fears about like what might happen in the future.
Yeah, and I think this is cross-cutting almost across genres, right? Regardless of whether you're telling a story on an alien planet or in 1890s England, and anything in between, stories are about relationships between people.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So that is a great point. All 3 of these are things that can show up in any type of story. And I mean, obviously, if you're writing an action story, you're going to have a lot more scenes that are about basic human survival. And if you're writing a romance or like a coming of age story, you're going to have a lot more things about relationship status. Excuse me. So then the third category of change is in the character's feelings or their perspective. So these are, the first 2 were sort of like external things, and this is more about like the heart and mind of your characters. So they could go from, being confident to being humiliated, from guilty to forgiven, or from, hopeless to having a plan. Those are just changes that that tap into like our emotional experience and also our thinking experience, which, I mean, we have feelings and think all day, every day. So they're
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much a plot-driven author. I'm starting on the plot side of things more so than I'm starting on the character side of things. And something that I see with authors like myself who are really plot and kind of external global story driven is that sometimes we got to slow down and during revision say, are we hitting those emotional notes, right? Okay, the character got new information, they have a new plan, but are we digging deep enough into how that changes them emotionally and how these external plot points are also impacting our protagonists and how they see the world, how they feel about the people around them and themselves and the adventure that they're on.
Totally. Yeah. And I love that you brought up the fact that you're a plotter. So I want to talk a little bit about like, okay, so I just told you about the types of changes that you want to have. How do you put this information to use in your own fiction? And so like, if you're a plotter, you can plan what change you want in the scene before you write it. But if you are, you know, more in the pantser side of things, like you're much more intuitive, you can write the scene first and then go back and change, or you can do any combination of those two things. There is no right or wrong way to do this. The thing that we want is by the end of the process, we want ideally every single scene to have some sort of change or reversal in circumstances, because that just tells the reader that like, oh, this something is happening here, and we can't help but care what happens when we see these changes happen.
Yeah, I think that, so what you're getting at here is how you build empathy is by demonstrating change, right? Because if we just read about a character, you know, John Smith came home, fed his dog, ate dinner, and went to bed. It's tough for me to connect with him because nothing's happened. He's done some stuff, but it had no emotional impact on him, and so it has no emotional impact on me as the reader.
Yeah. The fact that there's change allows us to identify the cause and effect. Because, like, if he doesn't sleep because his dog is sick, then we're like, oh, your dog is sick. I've had experiences of, being home with a sick pet. And, we infer meaning when we can identify the cause and effect. And that's really what allows us to create that really strong bond.
This is a little writing tip we haven't hit on anywhere in the summit yet. So I'm glad that we hit this. It's this idea that specificity actually breeds universality. And it's like when I told this really general story about a guy coming home, feeding his dog, eating dinner, going to bed, nothing resonated there. But the second you said his sick dog, suddenly I was like, I've had a sick dog, right? It's like dig into those details. And as a writer, you might think that by getting more specific, you're cutting people out. But in fact, the more specific you can be, the more it actually stimulates empathy and recognition and connection in the reader.
Yeah, and it's specific in a way that is going to bring about change. Like, we know when a dog is sick or a pet is sick or a child or somebody, that we want to do something to change that. So that's really what's going to keep us reading, which is where we're going next.
Perfect segue. All right, let's segue into level 3.
Yeah, so layer 3. So keep having the right balance between pleasing our readers and teasing our readers. So I don't know anybody else that frames it exactly this way. So let me talk about what I mean by pleasing and teasing. So authors please readers when they deliver what that reader already expects, right? So that's pleasing. And then authors tease readers by generating curiosity. Okay, simple enough. Why is this important? Well, so pleasing readers builds trust. It makes us as readers believe like, okay, I can trust this author. Even if they don't tell me everything right now, this is going in a direction that like, I'm going to be happy with this book if I keep reading it. So pleasing readers builds trust. Teasing readers opens up this part of our brain where like there's questions and we cannot handle uncertainty, and we have to close those gaps. And that is what like makes us skip bathroom breaks and delay dinner, and we're like, I have to finish this book, I have to know what happens here.
I think this is a great example of the relationship between fiction writing and art, and then copywriting and like marketing and advertising, right? Because when you're writing, say, the blurb for your book or any social media post trying to get people interested in your art or whatever, that balance between tease and please is exactly what you're looking for. You know, when I'm promoting this session, I'm probably going to have some bullet that'll be like 3 methods for strengthening the bond, the emotional bond between your reader and your protagonist. And as an author, I'm like, well, I want to know those 3 methods. So I'm getting pleased because I'm being told something I'm going to learn something that I want, but I'm also kind of teased because I'm like, what are those 3 methods? And so regardless of whether you're trying to sell your art or just create your art, finding that personal balance between that tension of giving them what they want, but also teasing and keeping those open loops is so important.
Exactly. And I love that you mentioned the book blurb, because so now we're going to dive into like, okay, so how do you do this? Because readers come to your book with expectations already based on your genre, based on your book cover, based on your book description, you know, that stuff that you write on the back cover. They already have expectations about what you're going to deliver to them. And so those things are things like they have expectations for specific types of scenes, for specific types of characters, and specific elements. So like scenes, you know, you're not going to write a romance without a first kiss scene, right? You're not going to have a mystery without somebody discovering the first dead body. Like, you don't have any kind of action or adventure without some kind of showdown with a villain. And not only is there a showdown with a villain, but it happens at the end. Like, those are expectations that readers, like, even if they probably wouldn't be able to tell you, like, if you had beta readers, but if you didn't like match your story up to those expectations, they would be like, something is wrong here, and it just didn't work for me. Like, these are the things that we're talking about, is those, you know, specific types of scenes, specific types of characters. So that means, like, you know, heroes, victims, and villains. In a horror movie, we expect monsters. In a romance, we expect there to be rivals. In anything with a hero's journey, we expect there to be a mentor. We expect, you know, there to be allies. We expect there to be enemies that aren't the true villain. You know, like, we already have those expectations for those specific things. And then, like, obviously, like, if you're writing fantasy, we expect magic and supernatural forces to play a role in the things. And if you're writing thriller, we expect a clock. If you're writing a Western or a historical or fantasy or sci-fi, we expect a lot of world building. Like, these are all things that readers already expect. And a lot of times we don't talk about them as, like, expectations. And so this, obviously, it's genre specific and is an enormous topic. And I just, for our purposes today, I want to give you the idea that readers have expectations. And if you really want to dive into, like, what are the specific expectations in the genre that you're writing in, I highly recommend checking out what my Sean Coyne, who created the Story Grid, and all of the other Story Grid editors have done on this topic. Like, if you just Google Story Grid genre, like, there's a ton of resources on that. And specifically, I wanted to mention the Story Grid Editors Roundtable podcast. They analyze movies based on their genre, and they talk about, this is how this movie met all of the different expectations for this genre and where it occurred in the story, which, like, is so helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're digging into here is this idea that genre is a contract between the artist and the reader. When you say, I'm writing a romance, you're making certain promises to your reader. And I think what you're hitting on with teasing and pleasing here is that you need to deliver on those promises. You need to hit those conventions, but you also want to do it in a slightly unique way, or not even slightly weak, absolutely unique way. You want to live up to all your promises while also surprising the reader, right? And so part of the tease is like, okay, I'm a fantasy author. Hey guys, there's going to be a dragon coming up, but
Yes.
will my dragon talk? Will it not talk? Maybe my dragon blows ice instead of blowing fire. Who knows? Whatever, right? But like the point is, that's where you can kind of like manipulate that tension. Is I'm going to give you all the things you expect, but I'm going to surprise you in how I give them to you.
Yeah, yeah, and I kind of want to bring us back for right now because we're talking specifically about scenes. So obviously, when I don't know if you cover in other interviews where you cover more the global story perspective. Like there's a lot that goes into this. I just kind of want to put the idea in your head of like, we want to please readers by giving them expectation or delivering on expectations. And then let's talk a little bit more about teasing as it relates to the specifics of your story.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, let's dig back. We were getting up high there, so let's dig it back down into that scene specific stuff.
Okay, so teasing happens when you leave some questions unanswered and also when you generate anticipation through repeated mentioning of an event, a character, or an object, like the dragon that breathes ice that Kevin just mentioned.
Or sushi. You can breathe anything.
Or sushi. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So let me give you the unanswered questions. I would just love, let me give you some examples of anticipation because that's not in the example that I brought.
Okay.
But that's where we're gonna go as soon as we finish this. So anticipation. So I just read Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane, and there's a hurricane that is an important event in that story. And many chapters before the hurricane happens, the fact that a hurricane is coming is mentioned. The weather is mentioned like ad nauseum so many times. Like it's like it's light rain and now the wind is picking up and just repeatedly. So we know that the storm is going to be some sort of big event where there's going to be a big change that happens during the storm. Other things. So do you know N.K. Jemisin, the Obelisk Gate, which is she's an amazing fantasy author who, so this particular series won the Hugo Award each one won the Hugo Award for 3 years running, which is the big fantasy and sci-fi award. So the second book is called The Obelisk Gate, and we know that the obelisks are magical objects, and the things are mentioned like just a ton throughout the story, even though the characters don't know like exactly how to use them until the end, which I don't think is a spoiler because that's what we expect from a fantasy. So those are things. So that's from a thriller and a fantasy story. And then like in romance, you generate anticipation. So like in Pride and Prejudice, we know that the ball at I can't remember the name of Bingley's house. We know that the ball at Bingley's house is going to happen before it happens. We know that Elizabeth is going on a trip with her aunt before it happens. Like we know that these things are coming, and that generates a sense of anticipation because the author wouldn't mention it unless it wasn't something important was going to happen during those times, right?
Absolutely.
So those are things that generate curiosity or I'm calling it teasing. And really the art of getting the right amount of pleasing and teasing is like, this is what I spend a lot of my editorial time on, is helping writers both on the layer 2 and layer 3. I would say helping people get the right amount of change in their scenes and the right amount of revealing information and delivering on what readers already expect.
Perfect.
So did you have anything else that you wanted to ask about that part?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, let's keep chugging along.
Okay, so let me chug a little tea and then we're going to jump into the example.
Oh, okay, fantastic. I should try to think of something to say here to fill some time so that you can enjoy your beverage.
Okay, so so I brought an example sequence from Game of Thrones. It's chapter 38 in book 1. I'm assuming that everybody knows that Game of Thrones was written by George R.R. Martin, but if you don't, there you go. It is at 50% the 50% mark of the story. So obviously, if you haven't read it and are planning to read it, then there's spoilers. So maybe go read it and then come back.
Isn't it like 900 pages? Like go read
long.
Read the first 450 pages, then come back.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay. So let me give you the setup here. So this chapter is from Tyrion Lannister's point of view. It's the 5th chapter from his point of view. And so Tyrion, he is a dwarf, so he is extremely short. He was taken prisoner by Catelyn Stark. Catelyn is the husband of the protagonist of book 1, who is Ned Stark, who is the Hand of the King, which if you haven't read the book, it's basically like, it's kind of like vice president / secretary of state / like dirty deed handling person of the king. It's a really high level position for the 7 kingdoms. So wife of this high ranking official takes Tyrion prisoner, and Tyrion's sister is the queen, and his family is like super powerful and extremely wealthy. So Catelyn took Tyrion and his road companions prisoner, and she has taken them to her sister's castle, which is called the Eyrie in the Vale. And Tyrion is in the Erie's dungeon, and this castle is in the mountains. So the dungeon is not the dungeon that we'd expect. It is a dungeon in the sky without walls, which is like, oh my god, so terrifying.
It's like my sushi breathing dragon, right?
Exactly. Yes. Okay, so that's the setup, and let me just orient you to this sequence. So there are 5 scenes in this sequence, and throughout this whole sequence, the value shift goes from imprisoned with very little chance of leaving and possibly death to, by the end of the sequence, Tyrion's got a real chance of getting out of this situation. And of course it ends in a cliffhanger that makes us be like, oh my god, I need more. But that's sort of like where we're going. And so now let's go through the specifics. And so if you, so I've given Kevin a PDF of this so you can follow along on the spreadsheet. So
just for a moment here, when you say sequence, so you've established here that we want these changes within each scene. Am I right in assuming that a sequence is a series of scenes with a larger change connected throughout?
Exactly. Yes. And that is what I spend the vast majority of my editing time doing, is helping writers, not only because a lot of writers can do the scene level change, but they really struggle with like, how do you do something that adds up to a larger change over a couple of different scenes? And that's why I really liked this example, because it had like a super clear, like, Tyrion looks like he's about ready to die, and now by the end he looks like he might win his freedom. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Cool. Well, let's look at it.
Okay, so our first scene is there's the jailer is taunting Tyrion, who we have to remember is like extremely short, by like holding food out of his reach. And you know, it's the only characters in here are Tyrion and the jailer. And then, you know, I already told you the setting. He's in this cell, and we don't know the exact time, because Tyrion doesn't know exactly what time it is, because he's been imprisoned for several days and he's starving. And so the value shift in this scene is that, you know, Tyrion, like, the food is there, like just out of his reach, and then it goes flying off of the precipice, and now he's definitely going to go hungry. So that's like a really clear, like, we're just like, oh, Tyrion, I've been hungry before and this is terrible, and even though I think that you might have committed terrible crimes, like, still I feel sorry for you. Right? And Yeah, so, and then when it comes to the pleasing and teasing, so this is the first scene in a sequence, so we often don't have like something that's an immediate pleasing thing at the beginning of a sequence, because we're just starting to get, you know, build up our menton. But clearly the tease is like, oh my gosh, like, is he gonna be stuck here? Because like clearly he can't help his family or himself get to power if he's dead. Right? So that's the first scene. And then the second scene, so for this particular, so we said layer one was if you have a change in time or location or point of view, that those are things that mark a start and stop. But because Tyrion is stuck in one place, I would add, if the other character leaves, you've got a new scene, because now you've got the character in a different situation. So in scene 2, we've got Tyrion is like sitting back and being like, okay, at first I thought my family was gonna come and save me because my brother is like one of the best swords people in the land, and you know, he loves me. And now, after I've been starved and beaten for, you know, several days, I'm not so sure that they're gonna come. And so during this scene, he has an aha moment. And so we're in the same setting as before. We're immediately after the previous scene. And the value shift is no plan to, okay, he's got a plan. And it's a tease because we as the reader don't know what the plan is, but Tyrion knows. And I want to talk a little bit. So scene 2 also includes a flashback. And I'm sure that when, you know, you're writing your stories, you probably also might want to write a flashback scene. And so I think about the flashback as a separate scene, but this flashback happens in the middle of the scene, which I think is really common, because when we present a flashback, it has to reflect on what's happening at the present moment in the story, right? So in the flashback, we learn about how Tyrion ended up in the dungeon, and basically he mouthed off to the lady of the castle, and she was like, I don't care who you are, to the dungeon with you. And that happened like in the hall that we're going to go back to later on in this sequence. And so it's a flashback, so we don't know exactly what it happened, but we do know that there is a break of time in this scene where we go back to prior to Tyrion being into the dungeon. And there is a value shift within the flashback itself. You know, Tyrion is like mouthing off and making threats about how like his brother's gonna come and save him and all of this stuff, and she was like, don't think so, dude.
Ain't gonna happen.
Right? And this is actually like pleasing, because the last time that we saw Tyrion in like I don't remember which chapter it was, but like he was at least not like bound, or you know, he could walk around. Like he was captive and he couldn't really leave, but he also wasn't in this dire situation where he was getting beaten and starved. So that's, you know, delivers a little bit of like, okay, that's why he's here. And his aha moment is like, okay, like my mouth got me into this situation. Now I need my mouth to get me out of this situation.
All right.
Okay, so then now we're on scene 3, and Tyrion calls the jailer back and asks him to convey a message. So we're back in the sky cell. It's immediately after scene 2, the part without the flash, or the cutting out the flashback, and then the value shift. We're going from, you know, Tyrion hasn't been communicating with anybody other than this jailer who's been beating him up, and now he's got a messenger. And the please part is, we learned the first step in the plan is deliver a message. But we have no idea what the response will be. And so that makes us want to keep going.
I think this is something really common that we see in heist stories often, is that our protagonists all have a plan that the reader only learns as the plan actually plays out, right? Like often I think of like the moment in heist films when they're like, okay guys, gather around like the blueprints, let's figure this out, and then you cut
and then they
like,
cut.
right, and so that's the teasing and pleasing there, right? The tease is we know that he has a plan. The pleasing is we're going to see these steps as they play out.
Yeah, and I love that you drew attention to this, because that delay, like readers and viewers, we want these things to be delayed. Like we want to have that experience of like, what's gonna happen? Like, I don't know, you know, it's sort of like the experience of like flirting, you know, like it's like kind of an enjoyable experience when you don't, like there's a little bit of uncertainty, but like you kind of think that things are going to go a certain way, right? That's yeah, like I just want to say again and again, delayed gratification is the name of the game, like in life and in fiction.
Absolutely. Okay, I love that you've gone there. I wasn't going to go there, but now that we're there, exactly. It's like if you're having trouble in your dating life, it might be that, you know, you're laying all your cards on the table too early. And I see that a lot with fiction writers as well, right? Where they just give all the information up front. I mean, this is kind of where info dumps come from, right? It's like this desire on the author's part to just like give everything to the reader as quickly as possible and all at once. Whereas, you know, if you're on a date, you wouldn't just like launch into a 20-minute monologue of everything about your life, right?
If you wanted to go on a second one, that wouldn't be the recommended.
Exactly. So it's about parceling out the information in a way that is both teasing and pleasing.
Yeah, and I think it's also like, I think some of the reasons that that writers do give that information is that they're really worried that their readers won't understand, or that they won't be interested. And like, it's actually the exact opposite of like, the less information that you give, the more intriguing. Like there's definitely, you know, within reason, but really, I find that I just say over and over, like the less is more. Less is more.
Well, I mean, in cinema, the classic example is Jaws, right? Like Jaws was this mechanical robot shark that Steven Spielberg wanted to use, and they just couldn't get it working right, and they couldn't get it looking good. And so for most of that film, you never really see the shark, but because you never see it, it created insane anticipation in the audience, and that film ended up becoming, you know, like a monumental classic blockbuster, but largely because you don't see it, you don't see the villain very often. It's hidden.
Yeah, and that's actually a specific convention of horror films, is that the monster stays off the screen for as long as possible. But let's come back to Tyrion and see what he's up to. Okay, so we just finished scene 3. Tyrion asks the jailer to convey a message to the Lady of the Vale. And I'm making some simplifications here. If you're a GOT fan, like, just let me acknowledge that I'm making some gross simplifications of the plot here, or yeah, or at least the people involved. Okay, so scene 4, a knight comes to transport Tyrion from his cell to the High Hall, which was the place where we were in the flashback, and he gets his cloak back in this scene. So the characters are Tyrion, the jailer, and Sir Vardis Egan, who is a knight, and we don't get a ton of information about where this is taking place, but that's really okay, because we just need to get the information that Tyrion is traveling through the castle. And one thing that I did want to make sure that I pointed out was that this is not immediately after the previous scene. And what I really love about that is because, like, if you think about it, like, okay, Tyrion asks the jailer to convey a message for him. That dude's got other things to do than deliver a message for one of his prisoners. Like, that's just not on the top of his priority list, right? So Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say on that whole chronology issue. That's so true. I see that a lot. Is people just instantaneously get from like one side of town to the other or whatever in a manuscript, and it's so true. These things need times to play out in a realistic and logical manner.
Yeah, and so not only is there time, but also this happens like late the same night because this is a time that is not convenient for Tyrion. And that's really kind of the point of it is the lady has decided that, oh, we're gonna take care of this right now. And so the value shift in this scene is from cold to warm. So Tyrion finally is no longer shivering. He gets his cloak back. And that also establishes this knight as like a decent human being because he helps Tyrion get his warm coat back or cloak back from the jailer. So what's pleasing about this is obviously we're proceeding on into the plan, so we're gonna figure out like what Tyrion's end game is here, and then the tease is like, okay, so he told Mord to convey the message that he would like to confess his crimes, but like the readers know that Tyrion doesn't believe that he did not commit the crimes that he is accused of. At least one of them for sure. We're pretty sure that he did not do. Okay, so the scene 4 is actually really short because it's just the traveling, and then scene 5 is like an epic epic length one, and this scene is back in the High Hall where we were in the flashback. It's immediately after the previous scene, and this is where Tyrion requests a trial for he's been accused of crimes, and both sides choose champions. And I'm really shortchanging this scene. It's really magnificently well done. And if you haven't read Game of Thrones, I feel really sorry for ruining it because it's just one of those like, oh my God, I didn't know there could be trial by combat, first of all, which means like basically a fight to the death to decide, so God can decide who is innocent and guilty. And Tyrion just does a lot of really he makes everybody laugh, and he like is extremely persuasive, and this is why he's like one of the best characters in the whole book. So we didn't talk about, so the change in this scene is like so when he first requests the trial, like everybody is like laughing at him, and like all of the knights that are here, because there's a ton of people that are here, so all of the knights of the Vale, who there's dozens of them, and they're all like falling over each other to be like, oh, let me kill the dwarf, please, like let me do it, all except for Sir Vardis, who was the one that we met in the previous scene, and who is of course the one that the Lady of the Eyrie is like, you shall have this task and you shall do it tomorrow, because Tyrion is like, well, my brother is going to do it because his brother is one of the best swordsmen in the entire kingdom, but his brother is not currently available. Tyrion actually doesn't know where he is in the kingdom because this is medieval fantasy, so they don't exactly have cell phones to be like, yo brother, count me out here. So there's like this really big moment of like, well, first Tyrion asks to, have somebody champion him, and then there's like silence. And then finally, one of his mercenary companions is like, I'll do it. Right? So yeah. So the please is like, okay, we've got the plan. We don't know if this is a good gamble or a bad gamble, but like we know what Tyrion was up to. And now the tease is like, oh my gosh, is this mercenary guy gonna kill this like decent knight? And it's like, is Tyrion gonna get his freedom, but like then this good guy is gonna get killed, and like we don't want either thing to happen. So it's just really compelling.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is a fantastic example, this whole sequence, because you know, what you've demonstrated here is this idea that we've got change within every scene, and yet at the end of none of these scenes can I like put down the book and be like, oh, I feel satisfied, right? Like it's like you have to keep reading. You got to get to that next scene.
Yeah, yeah, and Game of Thrones is really cruel because like so I read this and like I mean it's there's 9 point of view characters in the first book, and like after I got to the end of this one I was like I have to get to the next Tyrion scene, but it was like 4 hours later because I was reading the audiobook and I was like, but I can't stay up that late.
Totally. I always remember that reading Lord of the Rings for the first time when you finish the Fellowship of the Ring and then you start the Two Towers, and you're not with Sam and Frodo, and it's like I think there's like 4 books before you finally 4 books within books before you finally get to the the Sam and Frodo storyline, right? Because you do all the the other storylines first, and so it's really interesting the way authors can withhold point of view scenes in a way that like just draws the reader through, because you're like, I gotta get back to that storyline.
Yes, yeah, and this is why I don't recommend starting with 9 points of view as your first book. I really I would say 1 or 2 is plenty. Sometimes you might need 3, but like really for if you're early on in your author career, like don't try to be I highly recommend not attempting to be the next George R.R. Martin until you have, really kind of figured out how to do this on the sequence level, because if you can do this, getting these changes and figuring out the balance between pleasing and teasing and, getting those times in those places so that they're believable and easy to imagine, like you'll be so much more successful when you do write your epic fantasy with like 12 points of view if you don't have to think about this level, when you've got this level of skill, like just in your writer's muscle memory, it's going to be a lot more fun to write and a lot easier to edit your book if you've already got this part like down cold.
I agree 100%.
But I will say that Game of Thrones is a fantastic book if you do want to be like, well, what is a sequence? Because basically, I haven't analyzed the whole book, but I did think as I was reading it, like, basically every chapter is a sequence. And like most of them are, there's a couple of scenes in them, and if you're really having trouble to be like, well, what do we mean by sequence, you can pick this up and like read one chapter and be like, okay, well, what are the scenes in this, and what are the changes within those individual scenes, and like what's the change that happens in the chapter, and that's a really great way to learn.
I love it. I love it. Well, Lori, we're coming to the end of the presentation here. Do you have any final thoughts or a wrap up here that we want to hit on?
Yeah, I just really want to go back and I don't really have anything new. I feel like the things that what do I want to say? I don't actually have anything.
Let's I mean, we covered a ton here, so maybe let's just go back over our 3 different layers here.
Yeah. So I think the things that I want to say are the thing that I really encourage writers to do is to think about the readers and the reading experience of your book. And, you can think about it in 3 layers. The first is to get those geographic and timing, get that place and time correct. And that just makes it a lot easier to believe and imagine your story, and also to know when your scenes start and stop so that you can make sure that you are paying attention to the emotional bond that you're creating in every single scene. Right? So those are the first 2 layers. And really, if you're early on in your career, I would just go back and forth between working on those 2. When you've got those 2 and they're sort of working and you're feeling like this is getting easier, I feel like I could take on a little more, then add on like layer 3 of like, okay, am I doing things in each scene that are, delivering on what the readers already expect based on my genre? And am I doing things that are making them think like, oh, something interesting is going to happen like soon and I should keep going?
Perfect. I love it. Well, Lori, this has been an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I love the way you broke this all down, and then having the examples here from a Game of Thrones was just absolutely perfect. So thank you so much for this incredible presentation.
Yeah, I am so excited that I got to do it, and I just really appreciate the opportunity. And I did want to say that I also prepared a romance example that I do plan on sharing with my email list. So if you're like, I want that romance example, you can come find me at loripuma.com.
Fantastic. Well, we'll have a link right below the video here where people will be able to click on that and get over to your site and get on your list.
Awesome. Sounds great.